Simon here, Ceausescu's Lost Children, Episode 4. I am here today with Alesia Hadija. I hope I said that properly.
Yeah, Alesia Hadija. Yeah.
Alicia Hadija. Okay. I'm I'm here with Alicia today and we're looking to talk about her journey from Romania, and she is in Red Deer. It's not a red deer, it's Alberta, Canada.
Yes. Yeah.
It's nice to see you, and can you introduce yourself a little?
Yeah. So I'm Alicia. I came over to Canada in December of 90, and I was 11 months old. So I was born January of 90, right after Ceausescu and his wife had been killed. And so I came over at 11 months old, and I was really malnourished. I was 11 pounds at basically 11 months old. Um, and, started life here, I guess. So I was in a hospital though for those 11 months. Like, I hadn't been moved to an orphanage, so I had stayed in the hospital, but it was, from what I've been told, set up, quite similarly, where it was you'd walk in and there was cribs and a bunch of babies within the cribs, and they're crying and there's not enough staff to really nurture them at all. So um I was very, when I came over, like I said, malnourished, but also would stick to myself and really just didn't know how to interact, with anybody. So that took
So
time.
you, what happened from your birth? So you were there for 11 months, but what led to that? And did you, were you in a major city?
I was in Craiova. Um, so I don't know how big that city is, but I was born in Craiova, and then I stayed there until I came to Canada, and I stayed in the same hospital. Um, what my mom here had been told, is it kind of lines up with what the truth is since finding my birth family and speaking with them. But what we had been told is that my birth mother had left, that she was young, that she used a fake name to get into the hospital, and that she left 2 days after I was born. But what did happen, the truth was that she was young, and she didn't use a fake name to get into the hospital. Like, her and I had the same last name. And she had gone for lunch with her dad. And when she returned, I was not there. They had moved me to a different part of the hospital. And then she went back to the hospital the next day because she had been discharged, and said, like, "I want my baby. Where's my baby?" And they said, "She's been adopted off to France or to Italy," she said. But I had actually that so I was 4 days old and I was still there. I hadn't been adopted to Italy, and I stayed there till I was 11 months old and came to Canada.
So for her to accept that narrative on any level, she would have had to have changed her mind of abandoning, or
So the way that it makes sense to me, and it's hard because, she didn't have a lot of control within her situation. Like I said, she was young. She had younger siblings than her. Her family was not well off, and so, they couldn't afford to help take care of a baby. So I don't know whether she abandoned me and then changed her mind, or whether it was completely out of her control and she went against, you know, her father's wishes to go back to the hospital and try and get me. I don't really know that detail.
mhm.
Um, so yeah. And I haven't asked because, there's some things that I can accept and I can have my intuition about, and I can level with that to a certain degree, and there's some things that, like, I don't really know if I wanna know, and I don't wanna ask until I'm ready to know the truth, right? So,
And you know that'll rock the boat. So
yeah,
uh,
big
that's
time.
like one of those deal breakers for families is um, ownership over action.
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting because, she's a very sweet woman. I love her to death, and I'm thankful that I have her in my life. I'm thankful that I found her. I'm one of the lucky ones, I guess, in a sense where her and I can have a nice relationship. Not everybody gets that, and I'm aware of that. Um, she does often say, I'm so sorry and like thank you for forgiving me and all of that stuff. But it's amazing how even as an adoptee, I'll speak for myself, but I would assume other adoptees do this as well, where we'll just continue to put our own desires or needs below and put it to the side for somebody else's benefit. And we're just used to doing that, right? When you come into another family and sometimes you have the freedom to figure out who you are and be who you truly want to be, and sometimes you adapt to the environment and you adapt to what the expectations are of you. And it's easy to become a chameleon and then also kind of take that into your birth family's environment as well, where you just mold to whatever you think is going to be appropriate or not, right? So,
Absolutely. And some people may be thinking, wow, she has this incredible perspective that aligns with a field that would resonate with people in this type of environment. So, what do you do for a living?
I'm a social worker by trade. And so I work in an agency right now with women and children. My goal, though, I'm currently working on creating a business um, here, more for Central Alberta, where I'm at, to offer post support for individuals impacted by the adoption mosaic. So I do believe that there can be healing when we sit together, as adoptees or as adopted parents or as birth parents. And perhaps as you go on your healing journey, you can come together and learn from each other too. So that's my goal, is to end up working more towards the adoption field, I guess you could say.
Absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
personalized at that point. And if you look at in Canada, there's a very interesting situation for that sort of field because you can have kids from everywhere and anywhere, and that cross cultural uh, dynamic, especially with kids that are a little bit older,
Mhm.
is extremely fascinating. So I have a complete understanding why you really want to go into that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, there's a difference between an adopted, and I don't know what education right now is being done pre-adoption here. That's what I'm doing a bunch of research on. But it's very interesting because, as an adopted parent, when you adopt your child, you want your family, you want, some people say they've been called to it, whatever reasons that bring these people to adopting children. Um, they have a lot to learn, I think, too, in regards to what we come to the table as adoptees with, because, even though you might be adopting a baby, there is trauma there. And if you're not prepared to be, a parent that's confident in parenting, then that is going to affect the relationship at some point down the road for that adoptive parent and that adopted child. And there's a difference between bringing your insecurities to the table as an adopted parent and coming to the table as a informed, confident parent to help this child on their journey. It's helping your child on the journey. And even as a parent now, I see that. My job is to help you learn the tools and the resources for whatever your journey is going to be, because it will be different than what I expect or what I want for you.
And someone in your position is very familiar with why parents of any level with even very few insecurities would struggle to seek help because the system isn't necessarily designed to keep families together at this point. Uh, Keeping families together isn't that priority in the Canadian system, at least, and evidently in the Romanian system, it wasn't. So I see the value in that.
Mhm.
And when we speak about these sorts of values that you have, what is it that keeps you going every day knowing that you are a Romanian orphan and there's an element of who am I? Have you figured that out yet?
Yeah, and so, like, I can sit here right now and, have this conversation and be well, but that wasn't always the case. And, I struggled a lot with who I was and why was I here and, why didn't I have my birth mom? And I always felt a really strong connection to wanting to find my birth mom. Um, Solely, thinking about her, not really thinking about whether she had a family or other kids or whatever. I wasn't prepared for that. And I would assume that there's maybe a lot of people who, your sole focus is on finding your birth mom, finding I wanted culture so badly. I didn't have my culture here. When I was growing up, we had a couple friends from school that were from Yugoslavia, and we hung out with them and we go to their house. And I remember vividly one memory. I was there, the friend, his parents had an apartment and they were rolling their cigarettes in the apartment and they'd smoke inside. And I loved it because I was like, I don't know why I wanted European culture and I didn't have any of that here. And, other than like, one grandma who didn't live here, adopted grandma who didn't live here. And, um, I was craving that culture. And so I remember one time it was Christmas Eve and, we were all at my aunt's house having a good party and I just remember looking around thinking, I don't look like any of these people. None of them. I don't look like any of them. They all look like each other. I don't look like any of them. And that was so kind of heart-wrenching for me because I so badly wanted to know who I come from and do I look like them and, where do I get this from or where do I get that from? And so it was very hard in regards to my identity. It was hard in regards to my relationship with my adopted mom here because I had huge walls up with her. And at that time, I didn't realize it because you're functioning that way. You don't, unless something changes, you don't realize that that's how you're functioning. So um, I struggled a lot because I wouldn't let her in. I'd push her away as far as I could push her away, to see if she would stay, and I would do the same. I did the same with, my now husband. Poor guy. I did, but I was unaware of those patterns and those behaviors in regards to and that all came from my adoption, quite frankly, and the trauma of, um, having your mother leave you at 4 days old and not showing back up. So, um it was a huge identity thing for me, and, I do struggle with mental health issues, and it took a long time to get that sorted out as well, and, so there's a lot of underlying things that adoptees go through, and I would say a lot, probably from Romania, um, regardless of how good your environment can be, that still is subconsciously ingrained in you, and so, yeah.
So, from an intrinsic level, you, if you look back at what happened throughout your childhood or um, your experiences, what from an internal analysis or putting the microscope back onto yourself type perspective, would you say adoptive parents, and to no fault of anyone, they're
Mhm.
underprepared entirely to deal with what is coming. But how would you navigate that now as a parent yourself if you were in their shoes?
I would, it's interesting that you say this because I just had a conversation with my mom here a few weeks ago about what I'm trying to create in regards to programming and the reason I'm trying to create it. And I said, Mom, if we had had the post support that I'm trying to create in my business to offer adoptees, whether it be international adoptees or domestic adoptees, if we had had that support, don't you think maybe our relationship might be different? And she said, yeah, it probably would be.
Mhm,
And I said, because, she brought over 2 kids. So I have a brother that's adopted from Romania, but I don't want to share too much of his story because that's his story to share if and when he wants. But so she had 2 kids, 3 months apart. So basically like twins, both with health issues, coming from Romania, both in the hospital for a year. Um, so I don't think her mind was aware of the emotional impact that we would go through in regards to our adoptions versus how do we get these kids healthy? Because that's physically, we need to be healthy to live.
mhm,
So, um, I would say looking back, and if I was to do that now as a parent, if I was to adopt a child, I would, the emotional support needs to be there just as much as your physical support. Um,
And I think one of the most important things about that as well is understanding that the prenatal and early brain development
mhm.
is permanently impacted.
Yep.
So whether it be that they can regain that brain size or they can build those connections and meet those milestones or not,
Mhm.
there's a journey there that the average parent with love cannot fix.
Mhm. Yeah. 100%. And, even to this day, I mean, I'm a a functioning adult. I have a career, we have a home. Like there's so many good things going for us. Um, I can still sense when I'm closed off to people who I genuinely love and I genuinely don't want to lose in my life. And I just don't know how to get past that. Like if I have somebody who I feel absolutely comfortable with, great. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it's just not there and there's nothing I can do about it other than just accept it for what it is and try a little bit, but I'm not going to push myself out of my comfort zone either in that regard. But and that's all from back then in those early, formative stages of when you're a baby and um you're not getting cuddled, and the mother, when you look at the mother child bond in the womb and that's broken and there's so much trauma there that happens subconsciously that is in every child's psyche, right? So it
Absolutely.
happens a
And
lot.
that's the one of the biggest debates is something so simple such as does letting the baby cry it out produce an issue long term?
Mhm.
And we're not talking about letting a baby cry it out. We're talking about neglect to the point of almost death,
Yeah. Where they
sickness.
just stop crying.
Oh yeah, there's no one to hear you.
Yeah.
Or you're sounded out by all the other cries around you.
Yeah. And even, so for me, like I only got into have you heard of the term coming out of the fog? Have you heard that term for
Yeah,
adoptees? A little bit. So I really didn't nothing really changed for me until this past November when I kind of started realizing things about me and putting two and two together. And when I had my first son, his cry, shrill, whatever you want to call it, literally would give me anxiety that would just wash over my body. And still to this day, like his cry, it's the pitch, it's the tone. And I it literally sends the hairs on my back to stand up. And I don't know if that's because of all the cries that you like subconsciously that we heard, whether we were in the orphanages or whether we were in the hospitals. And like my youngest son, no, it's his pitch, his tone, whatever. It's fine. It doesn't do anything to me. But my oldest son, it is like triggering to me, and I can't. I mean, I deal because I logically I know I have to deal, but what it does to me physically is something I can't describe. Like, and my husband just doesn't get it, right? But I'm like, well, yeah, because you weren't in a hospital or an orphanage of however many kids in one room or four kids in a crib screaming and crying and not just crying, like, mm,
In pain.
yeah,
There's a difference
yeah,
between, yeah, a cry for milk and a cry for survival.
yeah, exactly.
And when you speak about that, it's one of my main interests with this project is the subconscious effect
Mhm.
of early development, because I am a firm believer personally that the prenatal development and early environmental elements de- develop the human being that you'll see 20 years later,
Yeah.
50 years later. And in speaking about that, I do want to learn a bit about what you remember of your childhood and what was your upbringing like in Canada.
So my upbringing here was great. I have really great parents. I have a brother, like I said. We have an awesome extended family. Like I'm very lucky to be where I'm at. Um, Good friends, good schooling, like, whatever we needed, our parents were there to be they had the ability to provide it. So I'm very blessed that way. Um, so to the outside, I was totally fine. On the inside, though, I was constantly longing for, like I said, culture, my birth mom, and I was very vocal about that. So as a child, I was angry. It
At
came
what
out in
age?
anger.
What
Oh,
age
like
did you know?
5. Like, I remember saying awful things to my mom around 5, um, and onward.
So
And
you
so it
knew
got.
at 5 years old?
Oh, yeah, I knew the whole time that like, I knew right from the get-go that I was adopted. I don't even
Mhm.
remember at what age I knew, I just knew I was adopted. And I would ask questions, and they would answer to the best of their ability, and at that time, what they had been told is kinda what I said earlier, where it was like, "Well, she left 2 days after you're born, we don't know her name, they did a police search for her, nobody could find her." Um, Became a child of the state had to, agree basically for mom and dad to adopt me, stuff like that. So and ironically enough speaking too, so my mom had gone to I was born in January. My parents went to Romania in October of 90 and met us. And then because of the issues they had with me, they left the country with my brother that they brought home. And mom went back in December to get me and bring me back to Canada. So not only did my birth mother leave and that connection was broken, but my adopted mom, who came and probably I would assume built a connection with me while I was in the hospital for however long she was there, left me. So I had huge issues around abandonment and fear of losing, my parents and who would take care of us and what would happen. And um, my brother really had to help me get through that time as a child because again, we weren't in therapy. There was no groups around. There still is no groups around post support. There was nothing for these families to help their kids through that stuff. And so I remember, we'd go to day home, mom would drop us off at day home, and I would go downstairs and I'd hide behind a chair and I would cry for hours. I would just rock because I rocked too. I don't know if it was because I sat in the crib and just rocked. So I rocked as a coping mechanism to comfort myself. And my brother would just sit there and rub my back. Mom will come back. It'll be okay. Mom will come back every single day.
So
And
did he cope better than you did?
yeah, as a child, yeah, I would say so. Whether he would agree with that or not, I don't know. He'd have to answer that for himself. But it was funny because we almost switched roles. Like once we became teenagers, I was okay because I was like, okay, like, we'll figure it out. Like you just know more about the world and how it operates and you know, um, and it was almost like I then had to comfort him through some things. So it was interesting. Like I don't know what would have happened if we didn't have each other, quite frankly, to get through it, even though we have
And
very
that
different
almost seems
viewpoints.
statistically opposite because usually the girls are the ones that are a bit more together at the young age, and then
Mhm,
when they hit that like puberty stage, they're the ones that are not the most are less rational compared to the guys. So
mhm.
it's almost like a role reversal there.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was very interesting, and I don't really know why it was that way, um, but yeah, it was that way. So, now the difference too between him and I is that when he was still in the hospital, like, again, I don't wanna share too much because it's not my story to share, but, his birth mother still went, um, and visited him
Mm.
right up until he was adopted. So, um perhaps because that bond was still there, it was a little bit different for him. I don't like, when you look at the psyche and how that would
There's
affect the psyche.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know what? I see that with kids that have contact with their parents in the system and kids that don't have contact with their
Yeah.
parents in the system. They typically act um, without objective, with reckless abandonment. They're more likely to be involved in drugs and gangs.
Mhm.
And the ones that had their families involved every day, their episodes of chaotic behavior would be reduced, especially so not immediately after a meeting with them, but a few days later.
Yeah.
Immediately after, they'd have episodes because of the disconnect. But
Mhm.
that goes to show the impact, even at an older age, of someone that does have that maternal connection and paternal connection with their parents,
Mhm.
uh, that there's an element of withdrawal. And when you tell me about your childhood, I find it so unique because two Romanian orphans from different circumstances. This must have been so difficult for your parents
Mhm.
because your DNA and desire for culture and where you came from, that's one side of it. But then on the other side, you've got parents that are feeling not guilty, but bad for what it was you went through,
Mhm.
and they don't know how to help with that.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even know if they realized that that was something that maybe would have benefited me because I had never verbalized that to them as a child. I just sat with that myself, right? Or, um, I would want to be around those families that I felt I was getting that piece from. And mom thought nothing of it because we all played together. So she didn't realize what it was doing to fill me up, right? And then you look at my brother and now we're both adults and have lives and, families and I'm always like, "Do you want me to cook you like a Romanian meal? Like, come over and I'll cook you a full Romanian meal." And he's like, "Yeah, sure." But his life is here. This is his family. This is his culture. Whereas for me, I'm like, I'm Canadian and I'm proud to be Romanian and I'm proud of where I come from. And there's a lot of beauty within that culture that I'm finally thankful I can say I've been introduced to. So, um, it's so interesting, and that's the human brain and all of that is so interesting to me because it's like, why is it different? We were raised in the same environment, different scenarios as to why we were adopted, but we were both in the hospital until we got adopted, different hospitals. So perhaps different things going on at each hospital. But when you compare, like, it wasn't that much different, and yet we're still so different, with our viewpoints on it. So
And do you think that stems from your meeting of your biological family, and can you walk me through that a little bit?
So, it was 2016 maybe. Anyways, it took me 3 years to find her. So it was 2016. And I was on Facebook and I was just scrolling through Facebook. My son was napping and a page showed up on my feed of I think it's called the Never Forgotten Romanian Children or whatever. And I don't know if you know Elena, but so I reached out to her and I asked her a couple questions like, why do you do this? Because I had tried finding my birth mom a few times and would hit roadblocks or just wouldn't get a good feeling from whoever I was communicating with. So I would shut it down. And so I asked her, what do you do? And she shared a little bit about her story as to why she's doing what she's doing. And I said, so what's the cost associated with this? And she said, nothing. And I was like, what? Anyways, I thought, screw it, I'll take a leap of faith. So I sent her the documents that she needed to get started and we started the search. And so, like I said, I didn't have my birth mom's name. All I had was her age, the name I was given, and then the hospital that I was born in. And so, she did her normal routine of, getting at least names and getting the information. So eventually we did get my birth mother's name. And then we were able to put an ad together and it kind of went nowhere. So then we left it. I thought, you know what? I have her name. That's more than I ever had before in my life. So I'm okay with that. And then in 2019, so that was 2016, 2019, or sorry, 2018, somebody reached out and said, oh, I think my cousin is your birth mom. And I said, oh, okay. So we start comparing stories and I was like, no, this isn't correct because nothing's adding up in regards to ages and time of year and nothing. So, I contacted Elena again and I said, what do I do? Like, do I purchase a DNA test and send it all the way to Romania for like, how long does DNA even last coming across the world? Like, I didn't know what the right thing to do was. So she said, well, let me repost your story because, I've got more followers now. So she reposted it about November, December of 2018. And then in January of 2019, she had made contact with my birth mom and that was that. So
And
I
what
have
was
her.
that first experience like? And did the first contact of any sort?
It was good. So Elena messaged me. It was 6 a.m. here. And it was a Tuesday morning. And she's like, we found your birth mom. And I knew, so the day before that, she had messaged me and said, I'm going to make contact with this woman to see if she's your birth mom. And I said, okay. And I went to bed and I said to my husband, like, I just knew I'd wake up and we'd have an answer. And so I woke up at 1 a.m. and I messaged her and I said, anything yet? And she's like, no, not yet. And I said, okay. So I went back to bed and then woke up at 6 a.m. with that news. And she's like, she wants to talk to you right now. And I said, no. I said, I have a meeting at 8. I have to get my kids out the door. I said, I will book tomorrow morning off from work and we can have however long she wants to talk at that time. So the Wednesday, I had dropped the kids off and came home and talked to her for the first time. And so there was Elena and one other lady that helped with the search on the call to help with translating. And then my mom was at my brother's in Germany at the time. And so it was amazing. Like I just remember seeing her and I thought, oh, she's so beautiful. I look exactly like her. I was like, well, there's all my answers in one face. And it was good. We had a good chat. She basically dumped like 29 years worth of just everything. I just everything. She really got a lot out that day and I just listened. and and then I went to Germany that following October. So October of 2019, right before COVID, to meet them in Germany. So for a week.
And do you feel like you'd already been adopted, you've been raised in a healthy family, you
Mhm.
went into your own family, having a husband, kids. Do you think that your reaction to your mother and the situation was much different than it would have been if you were 18, let's say?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, as much as I wanted to find her back then, I don't know that I was secure enough in myself yet. And, I hadn't become a mother yet. And so for me, becoming a mom also gave me an opportunity to see it possibly a little bit more understanding or empathy towards what she might have had to go through as a mother too. She never hid me from her other kids because she has 3 other kids younger than me. Her husband isn't my bio dad, but they all knew about me. They all talked about me. Like, it was not a shock to any of her kids or her husband um, when I kind of resurfaced, I guess. And, they've been really good with that, with accepting me and welcoming me. So, I do think that me having my own kids, changed my perspective for sure. Yeah.
And do your kids know about any of this? Do they identify as
Yeah.
Romanian?
Yeah. So, when I, was going to meet her, Aiden would have been well, he would have been 4. So, um and he's very smart, like, into him and I can have intellectual chats. So, um, he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, mom had," so I kind of explained it to him in a way where I said, "You know how grandma is my mom?" I said, "But I wasn't in her belly." So I said, "I'm gonna go meet the mom that had me in her belly." So that's how I explained it to him, and he understood that. So I said, "I have my mom here that you know as grandma, and then I have the mom that grew me in her belly but couldn't take care of me, so that's my grandma," like, put it all together for him. And so I did go over there, and he understood that I was going to see the mom that had me in her belly. And now they talk, like, they know her, and we
That
talk
was
all the
going to
time.
be my next question
Yeah.
is um, did you break that barrier? Because it's a big one. It's a
Mhm.
really big decision to say, do I let these people into my child's life?
Right. So yes, I mean, she hasn't been here, right? So her and her husband haven't been here. My kids and husband have not been over to see them. It was just me that went by myself. Um, but over FaceTime or WhatsApp video or whatever, they talk to her and she talks to them and I talk to her and all of them. So yeah, they're in each other's lives to a certain point. Um I would want to go over probably by myself before I would ever take my kids over there, just to make sure that I'm feel safe and confident, because even as I don't know what I'm walking into, right? So, and I
Right.
know the language, but I really don't know it the way that you and I can sit here and speak English. Like, I would, still struggle a little bit with some language. So it's a long way to go in that regard. But mhm.
Was there an elevated emotional state when your mom, birth mom, saw your children for the first time?
um, she was There was one moment. So I was looking at pictures one night on my phone when we were sitting in the kitchen in Germany, and I was looking at newborn pictures of Aiden, or showing her pictures. And when she saw his picture, she like made a sound, like a gasp almost, and like sat back and, "Oh my gosh." And she said, "That's exactly what you looked like," which I didn't know because I don't have any pictures from back then. So that was the moment that kind of surprised me, because I wasn't expecting it to be with my kids. She was, of course, emotional when she saw me. I was not, though. I had my wall up again, like deer in the headlights, kind of. You kind of put your barrier up to protect yourself. And then it was only like 3 days in or 4 days in that I finally let that wall down and let my emotion come, and um, let her kind of be there for me in that regard. So, yeah.
And I don't want to pry or be invasive, but will you ask the tough questions at some point in life?
Um, I don't know. The one tough question that I really wanna ask, I don't know if she has the answer. I have my intuition about it. I have my thought process about it, but I don't know if she, because the person who she could get that answer from has passed away. So I don't know if she has the answer. And I haven't quite come to terms with how I would feel if the answer was yes to some of my questions. So I need to be prepared for that because I don't want to sit in bitterness or anger if the answer is yes to what I want to ask. So, and I think, her and I had tough conversations when I was there. And I would almost rather have those conversations in person with her because it's
Hmm.
so hard when you're over the phone and then you get interrupted or whatever might happen in the day, and you can't finish the conversation. And, her and I had a lot of chats. It was, at night and when everybody else was kind of quiet and gone to bed, and we could have our time to really talk about things that, impacted her and I in regards to the story. And um, so I think, I maybe eventually I would ask her when it's just her and I, and it's in person, you know.
Have you been to Romania yet?
No, but I want to go.
You need to visit Oltenia
Yeah. Yeah,
and
the whole
Craiova.
country is beautiful. It's beautiful.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And do you feel that you want your children to identify as Romanian?
I speak Romanian to them. Um, my birth mom speaks Romanian to them, and then I translate because sometimes they don't always understand what she's saying. And then, um, yeah, I mean, I've spoken to them about that a little bit, about how, you're Canadian because you're born here. But I said, mom's from Romania and dad's family's from Israel. And like we've talked about all that stuff. So, okay, so I'm kind of Romanian cuz, and they put it together. But yeah, it's cool. It's
My
good.
daughter is obsessed with that, and
Is she?
she says, because my wife's Russian,
Hmm.
and my daughter knows a little bit of Russian, and she's around that Russian side, but there are neighbors that are Romanian,
Hmm.
and she's that. Oh, brief disconnection there. Sees that we speak together, and their kids speak Romanian, so she starts trying to speak Romanian to them,
Hmm.
and there's just some strange connection between the kids that are Romanian and have the same DNA. They look at each other. I'm not going to say anything. They're children, but an attraction on a physiological level to socialize with someone
Yeah.
like themselves. And that leads to my question about, you knew that you were different. You knew that there was some sort of urge for cultural or some personal satisfaction on that level. Do you still have that when after having your own family and creating your own environment?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I still had that. I was very um it was nice to see that I have a maternal nurturing side once I had my kids because I didn't have my walls up with them, right? Like they came from me. I grew them. Like there was such a different connection to them that I'd ever experienced before. So to see that I had that soft side was reassuring kind of. um and then, but I still definitely had that connection because that to me, that piece with my mom, my birth mom, and my culture and where I come from was almost I had separated it from my family here and like what I've created here. So I definitely still had that longing and that urge to know, my culture and where I come from, and to see what the connection would be like with my birth mother. So,
So you're
mhm.
in the hospital, you're awaiting your first child. I'm sure you nurtured your pregnancy more than you could have ever imagined anyone doing so.
Mhm.
And you get the moment of seeing for the first time
Yeah.
your own blood. What was
Yeah.
that like?
It was so good. It was so good. I'll never forget, like, as much as his shrill cry gives me awful anxiety, that moment of hearing him cry for the first time was so good, and it was a moment, it almost felt like time froze. There was a glimpse of time where, the nurse had taken him to bring him over to work, whatever she needed to do with him, and, I just remember looking at him and it just time froze. Yeah,
And
yeah,
that was the
it's good.
first time
Mhm.
anyone of your own blood looked at you in the eyes.
Yep, yeah. Exactly, and I think very like, that type of stuff I think about all the time, and I remember having a sleepover with my girlfriends. We were, like, 12 maybe. Well, no, we would have been, like, 14 maybe because I think we were in high school, and, we're all hanging out, talking, and they all knew I was adopted, like, it was so open, and I would always talk about, like, who do you think my birth mom is? Like, where do you think she is?" Um And I remember we were talking about, and that dawned on me where it was like, my kids, because my one girlfriend, her parents were teachers and they were going over to Europe to do exchange teaching or whatever. So we had been talking about Europe and I said, my first blood relatives that I know will be if I have kids. And so even back then I had thought about that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people do not understand is whether you're a male or female in our situations. Um, oh, I apologize. That's the second time. Not knowing your own blood is something that, regardless, you can have all the riches in the world, you can have everything that life could offer, or you could have absolutely nothing. But the more you have, the more you realize
Hmm.
that missing element, I think. And now more than ever, I wonder, do you see why somebody would give up a child as a professional and on a personal level? And would there be any circumstances you could see yourself doing that as well?
Mm. Um, I had always no, I don't think I would give my child up for adoption. I had asked my parents point blank as a teenager, "What would you do if I ended up having a baby at 15?" Because my mom was 15 when she had me. And my mom said, "Oh, we would figure it out." And my dad got mad and walked out of the room. So I don't think he was expecting that question. Um, so he needed to leave. He was a little taken aback. But um, I don't think I could give up my child. The unfortunate thing I think about, these women that go through this is, again, you're looking at the difference of, environment as well, right? So, there might be somebody, in North America that chooses adoption, there might be somebody in Romania that chooses adoption. The reason they're choosing adoption could be very different, circumstances, just because of economies and the way that, things are wherever they're at. Um, I can logically understand why somebody might choose adoption, and I think that I have empathy for those women because of the fact that they're women and I'm a mom, and regardless of whether they gave their child up for adoption or not, in my mind, they're still a mom, they're a first mom. The unfortunate thing is that so many people have been led astray at that time, with, you know, they haven't had that moment, until you meet your child for the first time and you experience that bond and you experience those maternal instincts kick in. You don't know that that's gonna happen the way that it happens when you're pregnant. Like, logically, you might know that, but experiencing that is so different. And so that's when you get the heartache and the shame and the, the pain that comes along with these women afterwards, because um they've lost a piece of themselves that they didn't realize maybe they could handle taking care of, and that's just me putting that out there. I don't really have anything to back that up. And again, I haven't given a child up for adoption, so that's my viewpoint on it, but that might not be necessarily how they feel either. But and that's why I say, like, post support is so important. And I think that my personal opinion, and I had a conversation with a lady in the States about this who is a birth mom. And I said, my personal opinion is that um, the mosaic of adoption, right? Whether you're adoptees, birth parents, adopted parents, has been segregated into its own area. So adoptees stick together and adopted parents stick together, and
Hmm.
they have their own little communities. And that's fantastic. There needs to be community. But I think that to have equality within the mosaic and to have true healing, when somebody's actually ready, because there might be pain associated with coming to sit at the table with, whatever, an adopted parent is a birth mother or vice versa. But at some point it would be beautiful to be able to see the mosaic come together and everybody feel that they can voice their opinions on an equal level and share their stories on an equal level, and not feel less than or feel ashamed by anything. That I
Yeah,
would
and
love to see that for the community, the whole community of adoption. And I would love to see culture being a part of that. So if you do an international adoption, fantastic. How can we get that child connected to that culture within, I don't know, Red Deer, let's say, because that's where I am, so that you as an adopted parent feel like you can parent your child to the best of your ability, but you're also giving them that piece of culture that you cannot give them. And emotionally, they may do better having that piece of culture in their life.
for those not aware of the Canadian um, system for orphans, adopted kids, and also kids in the system, they do this type of thing with Native kids, where there are retreats and cultural bodies that come into these environments. And they've been doing this recently, and most recently, they passed a budget, I think, in Trudeau's first term for Native families to go on retreats
Mm,
and work out their problems with professionals. And I see you doing something very similar to that, which is very smart because that allows people to come together over something other than their problems.
mhm,
And nobody wants to admit that they've got a problem. It's not a problem until it's a problem. That's
mhm.
what one of my professors way back when said.
Yeah.
You can drink every day, you can drink at work, you can drink when you're driving, but it's not a problem until it becomes a problem.
Mhm.
And I see adoption similar to that, where it's until someone talks about it, there's no
Mhm.
problems. But
Right.
then when problems are surfacing, the problem isn't my problem. The problem isn't your problem. The problem is somebody else's.
Mhm.
And
Exactly.
that's problematic. So coming together over something, whether we agree with it or not, which is primarily what this library of videos is going to hopefully do,
Mhm.
uh, is going to give everyone every sort of perspective. And
Yeah.
I really want your contributions in the future as well, because what I think you're going to be doing is on a micro level, which is the most important level, because you can watch something and you can say, oh, yeah, I identify with that. But the micro issues aren't addressed.
Mhm. Mhm. And that's just it, and I have I do have a soft spot for, I do have a soft spot for birth mothers, even though I come from the lens of an adoptee, I do have a soft spot for birth mothers as well, and I think, our wording is so important, and that's not just ours, but, like, globally, like, wording is so important. Oh, there you are.
Oh, I apologize. This is the third or
Okay.
fourth time.
That's okay. But yeah, I was
So you
just
were
saying that there's a lot of learning to still do and education to do, and I think the post support is so important and the communities that, I had one birth mother reach out to me from Calgary who, um, she doesn't have support. She doesn't know where to even start or to look, and, that's a problem. That's a gap in service. So, and if a birth mother feels that way, then I'm assuming adopted children. I know that this is being created because I felt that way. So, as an adoptee. So, um, it's, and I just hope that we can get to a place of there's no shame. It is what it is. Your story is your story and you need to own it. You should be proud of part of your story that gets you to wherever you're at. And
and move forward.
yeah.
I mean, if we look at the suicide rates, the depression or mental health rates in
Mhm,
the adopted Romanian community, it's very high.
mhm,
And this only gets solved by moving forward.
mhm.
You can't look back and get stuck.
That's right.
That right there is, you can have your issues, but you got to learn how to cope with them. And
Yeah.
then once you cope with them, you can develop a system in your life that eventually re educates yourself and rewrites your script in terms of your habits and your maybe presentation and different
Mhm,
elements of who you are, that is not changing you, but removing those stresses that
mhm.
create instability in your life and our lives
Yeah.
or anyone that's involved. And that is what I think is going to make a big difference in what you're trying to do with your project.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that, for me, it doesn't matter how much love has been poured onto me, trauma is still there. Trauma is trauma, and love isn't gonna take away trauma. Hard work, and supports, professional supports is what's gonna help somebody choose to work through their trauma. And, if we can be an avenue to, in your project, educate people and have them see how people have really been affected by this time and Romania per se, um and if we can have families here or families wherever this is going to end up being, have the tools and the resources to offer supports for their kids or themselves to work through their trauma, then we're succeeding, right?
Absolutely. And I think when you say choose, for people that aren't in the field, the reason why you emphasize that is because a parent, and this is one of the biggest mistakes that parents make as adoptive parents, is you can't force a child into a room with a social worker. You can't force them to speak to you. You've got to build that relationship through
Yeah.
activity.
Hmm.
And I think that's where your experience will help people in those situations to know that we can talk over a board game. We can talk over an interest, a common interest, because the information that will be shared will be chosen to be shared by those people. They'll
Right.
choose to share that. They're not going to share it because I simply want you to tell us what's wrong
Mhm. Yeah,
because you
exactly.
may not know.
They might not know, and, you that's not trauma informed, right? So, when we're dealing with trauma, we need to be trauma informed. But
Hmm.
that's easier said than done sometimes, right? So,
Oh, absolutely, especially in
mhm,
crisis. You see
mhm,
thousands, tens of thousands of kids get adopted. And at what point in that, especially in the 90s, at what point was the overall well-being of those children 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now a priority? Even a year from then, it was just get them out of here.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, and it there yeah. What it was, it's heartbreaking to see what happened back then in the orphanages and in the hospitals and how much children had to endure.
It's
And,
horrible.
it's inhumane and there's so much wrong with it. Um, and to think that even the birth mothers probably hadn't been properly informed as to what was really going on in those orphanages, because I'll tell you what, I would rather be a poor mom and love my child and have to beg for food on the street than put my kids in an orphanage if I knew that they were going to be abused the way that those kids were abused and neglected.
And
And
that's where the communist element comes in, I think,
yeah.
because they had a trust in the system that was failing.
Mhm.
And when that trust, blind trust, leaves you to drop your kid off at a hospital or on a doorstep of some place, your mind says, well, they'll take care of them because
Mhm.
that's what communism does.
Yeah,
And that wasn't true.
that's right. So how heartbreaking for them too as mothers. I mean, then you add another layer of guilt and shame as things came out probably and they realized just how badly their kids were being treated in there. There's a whole nother element of heartbreak and shame and disappointment and guilt that would probably be added to already have given your child, you know, into this care. So I would assume, but
Yeah. And
I
then the
feel
legal repercussions potentially in their minds. Um, my birth mother said that was, I don't want to be held legally accountable, which by law in Romania, there's nothing that could do. But the notion is that they're afraid of the state
yeah.
and you don't want to oppose the state, but it's the same state that, in say in your situation, potentially didn't have enough structure to avoid you going missing from your mother.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like it's crazy. It's like a big web.
It's a messy, sticky web that
It's crazy.
just and it's there's I think the crazy thing to me is that all of us that, have come from this environment and this background of Romania at that time and hospital or orphanage, there's a piece of our story that still isn't connected. Like,
Mhm.
I can ask my birth mother whatever questions I wanna ask. She only knows the answers up to a certain point. I can ask my mom here whatever questions I wanna ask. She only knows the answers up to a certain point. To know, like, what happened in between, and that's kind of the wild thing. I mean, you and I could sit down and tell our kids verbatim from day 1, "This is what your life has been. This is what we've gone through as a family." And we don't have that. And that's
And
kind of
cost,
mind-blowing.
just simple. We're talking basic things like the cost of adoption.
Mhm.
Like we're we're not even discussing the details. Even if you go like you can say, oh, totality, like the picture,
Right.
we need to make a whole. No, I'm like just cost of each adoption. What were the costs? There is no evidence that some may have been sold 400 bucks without papers. Some might have been sold $20,000
Yep.
with two sets of papers. Some might have been just driven right across the border with nothing or
And again,
falsified.
informing parents on how to be informed. Because I had a con since you and I have been talking, I had a conversation with my mom, and she said to me last night, she went, and when she went and she saw me, she had said, "I want to adopt this little girl." And they said, "Okay," but they tried to get her to adopt this other little girl. And mom said, "No, that little girl is already has a family, like, that is adopting her." So she said, "I could have easily gotten sucked into giving these people more money for a child that had already been adopted and was just waiting to go home or waiting for the process to be finished or whatever the case was, that their family had already paid for." And she's like,
A-
"And then I would have left with no child."
And then Western people come over there thinking hospitals, authorities, these are people that you're supposed to trust. So
Mhm,
I'm going to give you that 10,000. And they say in cash, well, it makes sense because we're in a foreign country. I can't deposit a check or something, right?
mhm,
So they pull out the money, they hand the money over, and they say, okay, so here you go. And they're expecting a system to
mhm.
actually provide a service. But it wasn't a system, it was
Yeah,
organized. I don't want to say organized crime, but it
that's what I'm
is.
thinking, yeah. Yeah, yeah, and that's it, that's just it, right? It's, mm, it's wild to think about, so could go
It
down
is.
a big rabbit hole with it, but
So I want to end this on a positive note.
Mhm.
So I want to talk about how long it's going to take to get your project up and going, and can we get you back here when you have it up and running?
Sure, that'd be awesome. Well, I'm in the midst right now of creating the programs, and the workshops. So, I would like to have them running. Well, there's so much more to having to get this off the ground, but the workshops will be created by hopefully end of July, and
Wow,
then
that's soon.
yeah, I have a crunch time. So, and then we'll go from there. So hopefully by the end of July into the fall, I'll be able to start actually offering these. But right now, like I said, I'm just doing market research and making sure that what I want to create is actually what people need and want, so that I can adapt everything to actually meet people's needs because I don't want to waste people's time. And, um, so that's kind of where I'm at right now. And yeah, go from there.
That sounds fantastic, and I
Mhm.
think it's a common theme that Romanian orphans or adopted individuals want to contribute or give back, and
Mhm.
you're exemplary in that, especially not only with your career choice, but what you want to do with your career and redirecting it towards helping people
Mhm.
in similar circumstances. And I
Yeah,
commend you for it because
thanks.
to do something so personal to you is the most difficult thing to do professionally,
Mhm.
and remain objective as you have just outlined that you want to provide services for needs of others.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
and I
that's
think that,
remarkable.
that's the beauty of what community is though, is, I can offer this service professionally and have boundaries around it, but, um, the people we meet all have impact on us, whether our clients or whether, it's us impacting them or whatever. So, um, I'm excited, and I think that sometimes coming to the table with your own experiences like this, even though you have to stay objective, also helps in regards to the fact that it is my passion and nothing else is. So, I actually have life inside of me when I get to think about the fact that maybe there'll be other families that won't have to struggle the way that my family here struggled in regards to post support, or kids won't have to struggle the way that I've struggled, emotionally, mentally, because there's something out there for them to access that's catered to them. And that's what we're lacking. So, yeah,
There's
I'm
a
excited.
motivation there to do
Yeah.
the, not just do a job, but to complete a service and have a complete service
Mhm.
that provides people not just a quick fix, a medication, but
Right.
ongoing support.
Yeah. No more Band-Aids. Done the Band-Aids for a long time. Don't wanna do it. So, I'm excited and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and, hear about what your project is, and I think it's amazing what you're doing as well, and it's so, awesome to see that, there's other people out there that take their own experiences of adoption and want to bring light, and education to what's really going on or what was going on, and how these people 30 years later are still affected, um, because it's generational trauma,
Absolutely.
and we have families now, and where does it stop? And so it's awesome to sit down with you and learn about what you're doing too, and I'm thankful that we have someone like you to be able to, put our voices out there. And I always say too that Elaine is my angel. She's my walking angel, my guardian angel on earth, because, what she's given me too, to her, she's got other things on her to-do list. But, the impact that she's made on my life is, you know, there's no value you can put to that. So yeah.
And we're young professionals. So
Mhm.
this is just the start of this community, and it's going to grow. It's going to become impactful. We're going to change lives. Whether you're a social worker as yourself or somebody that has no affiliation to anything but has a skill set, they can provide. If you're in web design, if you're a graphic designer, if you're uh, anything, you can provide a service in this community. And as long as you have your cards in order, you can help others. And that right there is really the true meaning of where we're headed with your project, my project, what
Mhm.
Yelena does, what everybody's contributing. And eventually, I think will not only provide the Romanian orphan community a tremendous service, but will set an example for other communities to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. That's exciting to think about.
And I
Mhm.
really thank you for coming on today. This is Ceausescu's Lost Children, episode 4. I apologize for the small disconnections in between. That's the horrible experience of COVID and
That's
internet
okay.
connections. But this is BC Simon with Alesia Hadija. Did I say that properly?
Mhm.
I
Yep.
got it. All right. And thank you for
Woohoo!
coming on. And we will have you on again sometime.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a good night.
You too.